So let's dig deeper into some of those stories. Let's have a look at how the media is discussing these issues. So we've got the Washington Post and its take on the departure of Gary Cohen, who, as we've already mentioned, has resigned, believed to be over disagreements about President Trump's trade tariff plans. The Telegraph, of course, has more on the espionage story that's gripping the UK. This paper looks at the allegations that Russian President Vladimir Putin vowed to kill the Russian double agent who was poisoned along with his daughter. They're both critically ill in hospital. Arab News is looking at the visit of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the three-day visit to the UK. The controversial Saudi prince will have lunch with the Queen, hold talks with the Prime Minister as well. Financial Times, Brussels and Paris are due to publicly rebuff Theresa May's proposals to maintain the City of London's access to the EU single market. The paper says European Council President Donald Tusk is likely to offer a more orthodox trade agreement as used in the pact with Canada. And finally, Mashable website, as well as many others, including ours, has the International Women's Day Barbie entourage. They're honouring accomplished real-life role models with their very own dolls. From the aviator Amelia Earhart to USA Olympic snowboarder Chloe Kim, Barbie has created 17 dolls inspired by impactful women from different backgrounds and occupational fields. Well, we've got Cornelia Meyer with us, who is CEO of MRL Corporation, to talk through some of those stories. And Cornelia, you were saying you would nominate your mum for a Barbie doll.
I would nominate my mum, or I would nominate, being an economist, I would have to nominate Christine Lagarde. She runs the IMF.
Indeed, she is. I've chatted to her in Davos. Maybe you did too. But let's talk about Gary Cohen now, because as we've already discussed, he has decided to leave the White House. Not a big surprise, because we've known that the relationship has not been easy with President Trump. But what I find interesting in the Washington Post analysis of this, it says they had a clash over President Trump's sharp and sudden pivot towards protectionist trade policies. I thought they weren't sudden, they're sharp, but we've known about his protectionist ideas since before he was elected.
Yes, but we always hoped, I think it was hope against hope, that the bark would be a lot louder than the bite. And for a year, it seemed that the bark was a lot louder than the bite. And then he has these protectionist faction with Navarro and Wilbur Ross. And they have sort of finally taken hold of him, and so he's come out with these tariffs. So now Steve Mnuchin is probably the only sort of reasonable, that's the Treasury Secretary, is probably the only sort of, for you and me, in you and my view, who are, free traders and want open economies, the last man standing.
So of his team, as it were, I mean, many viewed Gary Cohen as you say, one to balance some of the others, the likes of Wilbur Ross, the Commerce Secretary, who, has been very vocal about his thoughts on this sort of Trump tariff plan, as it were. How far will this go, do you think, in terms of the possibility of trade war? What are your clients saying to you about this?
Well, I think everybody's worried about the trade war, and I think we won't know anything until we really, Trump made the announcement, but as always with Trump announcement, it wasn't followed up with policies from the US Trade Department, which you would need USTR policies. So when we see that these policies really come into effect and are there, then there is a real danger. You had a guest on from the EU, and the EU is really trying to target where it will hurt Trump and his midterm election prospects. So let us hope we are not going there, because Trump has also announced he wants tariffs on European car makers, which really, really worries the Germans.
Now, let's have a look at the Daily Telegraph. Putin swore revenge on poisoned Russian spy. That's their front page headline, as it were. Basically, very markedly pointing the finger at Vladimir Putin and his regime. Give us your take on this story.
Well, the thing is, at this point, it's all rumors, and we don't know. If it is true that the Russians were behind it, and if it is true that the Russians were behind these other 11 mysterious deaths of people who criticized the regime, then clearly Her Majesty's government has to do something. But at this point, we are in speculation phase. We do need the proof. Now, it was not clever of Putin to make these remarks, but these leaders, especially if they're sort of autocrats and they've been in there a long time, they say many things.
What do you think about the timing? They've got an election coming up in just a few weeks in Russia. Of course, everybody is assured that President Putin will be reaffirmed as president for another term. But also they've got the World Cup coming up in the summer, the Football World Cup. You know, renewed sanctions or difficult relations with other countries. It's not really good timing for them, is it?
It's not really a good timing, which is one of the reasons I'm saying. So let's first get the proof before we accuse. But clearly something very fishy has been going on.
Let's have a look. Yeah, I was going to say that's a bit of an understatement, but anyway, let's go on to Arab news now. And they've, of course, splashed all over their front page. A Saudi Crown Prince begins his landmark UK visit. His first visit, he's just 32 years old, and he's really making his mark. Cornelia, you have sent me in advance a lot of analysis of how important this trip is, what it means for Saudi Arabia, what it means for the United Kingdom. But at the same time, there are those who are not happy about his visit at all. Protests planned outside Downing Street today. Those who are very worried about Yemen, for example.
Yeah, those who are worried about Yemen, and certainly, you know, there is the worry about Yemen and human rights in Yemen. But then let's look at what the prince is trying to accomplish in his own country. And he's with his Vision 2030, he wants to wean the country off oil. He wants to bring, you know, tourism, other sectors that create jobs. You have 32 million people, and 70% of them are under 30 years old. So really he does need to create the jobs. The oil industry is not going to create the jobs. So for many of the millennials, for many of the young people, he's a real hero. He tries to empower women. Recently a young Saudi woman told me, you know, since Mohammed bin Salman is crown prince, it's the first time I'm proud of my country. So yes, they're the skeptics, and I'm sure there's reason for criticism, but within the country, within this very young country, the very young population is very fond of the prince.
And from the point of view of the UK, I mean, they're really rolling out the red carpet. He's going to be being entertained by the Queen. Of course, he's going to Downing Street. He's meeting with the Prime Minister, Theresa May. This is a very important economy for the UK. The trade relationship could really benefit the UK economy.
It's about 10,000 jobs that are tied into this trading relationship right now. It's been up 41% since 2010. It's about $6.2 billion now that we export to Saudi Arabia, mainly in the defense sector, but there are other sectors.
Controversially in the defense sector, where Saudi Arabia is at war with Yemen, a very controversial war with a humanitarian crisis that's getting worse.
That is controversial, but then there's also the Saudi IPO, where New York, Hong Kong, Tokyo and London are competing.
Now that's the market flotation of Aramco.
Of the state-owned oil company, the prized oil company, which will be the IPO to end all IPOs. The Saudis value it at $2 trillion. It is probably less, but it is going to be a big IPO, and especially post-Brexit, London would love that IPO.
Thank you. Interesting to get your thoughts on that trip, and we'll keep an eye on how it goes here on BBC News, that's for sure. Now let's talk Barbie dolls. International Women's Day tomorrow, but so many things going on throughout the whole week to mark the role of women in society. And this is one look at the various Barbie dolls. We've mentioned Nicola Adams, the Olympic boxer. She says she's honoured to be noted. We've got Amelia Earhart, the USA Olympic snowboarder. Chloe Kim, that's a snowboarder, should I say. The aviator Amelia Earhart. Your thoughts on this? Is this actually a good thing?
It's a very good thing. And I remember I was not allowed to play with a Barbie doll precisely when I was a small child, precisely on the account that it was sort of a blonde airhead and not a woman of substance, because my mother was a woman of substance. And only when a friend of my parents gifted me with a Barbie doll, they couldn't do anything anymore. And it was my favorite toy. It was my favorite toy, because it was I could rebel. But I think this is brilliant, and we have to give women role models. You know, when you give people role models, you inspire them, and you tell them, yes, I can. Which is why I said my mother would be a good Barbie doll, and certainly Christine Lagarde, because she tells all of us, yes, you can run a big international organization.
Absolutely, and yet there is still some way to go, isn't there? As we are extremely aware. International Women's Day for you, what does that mean?
Well, it means for me we are going step by step forward in trying to be equal.
Thanks, Cornelia. Good to see you. Good to have you too for us on the briefing. Stay with us on BBC.